Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home.
All right. Hey, Karen.
Hi, Dan.
And we are pressing on in April.
That's right.
April showers.
Hopefully we'll bring May flowers.
And other plants.
And food. Yay. Yep. So let's see. Right now, according to the calendar, we're still transplanting some stuff. You should have your peas outdoors by now. Maybe you could start seeding your new lawn. So, think about National Arbor Day, of course. You got to maybe plant a tree. But May's coming up fast now, and so we're going to start looking at some of our field crops.
That's right. Yeah, there are a lot of things, like according to my wonderful West Virginia calendar here, it says on April 20, seed carrots, Swiss chard, Asian greens, and sweet corn.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk sweet corn.
And this is the time to get that seed in the ground.
And sweet corn is like the summertime staple. It really defines 4th of July barbecues. And, it's not summer if butter's not dripping off your elbows, right?
I never thought about it in those terms before, Karen.
Well, that's my summer. It's not summer with butter dripping off my elbows from eating way too much sweet corn. But there's there's a lot of new varieties of sweet corn. Some of them that will maintain that sugar content for longer before they turn it into starch after harvest. And so that's really what makes sweet corn sweet, is that it hasn't changed all of the sugars into starch yet, which is what our field corn does, right?
Yeah, because starch is not sweet. But here's the thing. In nature, chemically speaking, so starch is just a huge chain of sugars, right? It doesn't taste sweet, but you can store a lot more starch than you can free sugars. So that's why when you look at field corn versus sweet corn, you get that wrinkly appearance, generally smaller. Field corn is starch, and it's bigger, and it has more energy, but it's just not very sweet. So why would you want to eat that unless you're a cow?
Or if you're grinding it up for storage and whatnot, it makes good flour.
It does make flour, yes. And then from corn, then you get cornmeal, and then you get cornbread.
Yeah. And, one of the common mistakes our smaller gardeners do is they don't plant enough corn. So corn is wind pollinated. And so you have to have enough pollen floating around to pollinate every single tiny, teeny silk that's coming out of the ear of that corn. So if that silk doesn't have a piece of pollen land on it and effectively pollinate it, then you're not going to have that kernel bloom into a seed, right? And I guess bloom is the wrong word here, but you get what I mean.
Well, no, but you're actually the tasseling, right?
Yes.
So we're talking, yes. So the tassel would be the male part of the corn plant, and then the silks are the female. What you want in a wind pollinated crop is you want to have everything in the reproductive stage at the same time. So you want them to tassel all uniformly. And I'm going to back up, because in order to have uniform tasseling, you have to have uniform germination. So even though it's okay to plant now, if that soil isn't around 60 degrees, you're not going to get uniform germination. You're going to get sporadic germination. And at that point, the suggestion is to just start over.
Yeah.
You do not want a sweet corn plot that is not uniformly germinated, because you're not going to get kernel fill at pollination time that you need.
Right. So make sure that you're actually measuring soil temperature. There are some people who have successfully transplanted corn so that they start the seed indoors and get an extra head start, and then they plant those germinated seeds outside. So that has been done successfully, but it is a lot more labor intensive than just putting the seed in the ground. And when you're talking acres and acres of corn, maybe it's not the best option.
And when we talk about sweet corn, at least from a production standpoint, we're talking about like 200, 300 plants. And, in order to get like a nice plot, transplanting is difficult. I would say going by seed is probably the easiest way to do it.
Oh, by far.
Transplanting to me sounds difficult, but possible. And that uniform germination, though, that's very critical. My advice is if you don't have uniform germination, replant.
Yeah, especially if you can observe it early on in the season. And unfortunately, when we're looking at wet soils, you often get non-uniform germination because those soils that are more waterlogged tend to be a little cooler and may not be warm enough to germinate that corn just yet.
Yeah, so if you think it's a little early, you can test the temperature of your soil. Just basically put a thermometer in the ground at the proper depth, and you will get the temperature of that soil.
So what is the proper depth of corn, Dan?
I want to say it's about an inch and a half.
A lot of people plant corn in this area at about this time, but it is frost sensitive. So you do have to be careful if we do get a late freeze. Maybe have some row cover on hand that you can spread out across the fields. And yes, they make row cover for large farm fields. You can buy a 200-foot roll of row cover and then just roll it out over your crops, especially with the season that we've been having. We're not sure of what's coming next. So having a plan to protect your crops should we get a late freeze would be great.
So let's talk about the different varieties of sweet corn.
Yes.
You have your standard sweet corn. You have your super sweet corn. And then you have your sugar enhanced. And really, when we talked about, what makes corn sweet, we're talking about the pathway taking sucrose into starch. So what happens is you have essentially halted the gene responsible for that conversion from sucrose to starch. The later you do it into the cycle, the less sweet it is. So your standard sweet corn is typically your SU sweet corn. And that one it's actually a deep branching enzyme for starch production. So you've gone 3 steps into the pathway from sucrose if you're really counting them. And then your super sweet is your SH2 varieties, and those occur really close to the sucrose production point, and you're going to get a lot more sucrose. And one of the things with sweet corn that we need to understand is, whether you remove those enzymes or not through, and it's genetics, right? So, what you're doing is you're making sure that you have a variety that doesn't go through that pathway in order to make it into starch, but it will eventually polymerize itself. So, when we talk about sweet corn, it's got to be eaten fresh, because if it isn't, it polymerizes and then it becomes almost like a field corn.
Right. Okay. And so I'm going to break down some of this genetic discussion that Dan's having here. When you're looking at your normal, your corn, your SU variety, they're going to be flavorful and vigorous growers. Okay. They're not as sweet as your hybrids. And as soon as you start picking them, that sugar is starting to turn into starch. If you've ever heard the tradition of putting the kettle out in the field, they have a normal old-fashioned variety of sweet corn, because as soon as you pick it, it's starting to change to starch. Now, when you're looking at your SH2 or your super sweets, those are hybrids. They have 2 to 3 times more sugar than a normal hybrid. And the sugar in their kernels changes to starch very slowly after harvest. But they aren't as vigorous as the normal hybrids. They're more easily stressed by cold and other problems. And they often have a little bit less of the corn flavor, but they also have to be isolated from your normal and sugar-enhanced varieties when they're pollinating. So maybe if you're doing both, offset these by a week, 2 weeks, and at least 25 feet apart.
Right. So that's really interesting. I love that aspect of isolation. So you could do temporal isolation, where you just stagger the planting date so that it's not all in reproduction at the same time, or it could be spatial. And usually the recommendation is 250 to 300 feet of distance between the plots.
Yeah, 25 feet if you're just in your backyard, right? And you don't have a big commercial field.
Okay. Yeah, but you're going to get some contamination.
Well, and let's talk about what that contamination is going to do. It's just going to make your kernels tough and starchy. You're going to lose that reason you're planting it.
Well, here's what happens. Your standard sweet corn that you were saying and your super sweet are two different genes. So what happens is if you plant them close together and they cross-pollinate, everything gets complemented is what it's called, and then you'll get the dominant version of that gene. And guess what? The corn wants to make starch, and if you get complementation, so if you get a cross between those and the mutations in different areas, you're going to go through the full production. So if you're doing standard, stick with standard. If you're doing super sweet, stick with super sweet. And if you're doing sugar enhanced, that is typically done by itself as well because you have both knockouts is what they're called.
Right. And so your sugar enhanced is kind of like halfway between your normal and your super sweet. They're going to be a little bit more vigorous than your super sweet, but not quite as vigorous as your normal. Their stress tolerance, their flavor, their sweetness, they all kind of land in the middle. And these, again, they don't need to be isolated because they already have that normal gene in them. And these are the ones that have the SE or the SE plus or the EH, everlasting heritage varieties, those types of things. Those are your sugar enhanced, which are kind of the halfway between point.
Yeah. And honestly, the recommendation is to plant these sugar enhanced varieties 1 week later than a standard variety. So keep things uniform. If you're doing normal sweet corn, stick with normal sweet corn. Don't start getting creative because then what happens is you'll get field corn.
Yeah, this is true.
Nobody wants that, especially having a 100 square foot plot of regular corn. You're not going to do much with it.
Yeah, and for our listeners who are just small gardeners and say they want to try this Three Sisters garden this year, when you're thinking of a Three Sisters garden, you're not talking about sweet corn. You're talking about a dried corn, something that would be used for cornmeal or popcorn. So you want a corn that's actually going to dry in the husk because otherwise you're going to be stomping all over your beans and your squashes while you're harvesting your corn. And so that particular planting system is designed around a dried grain that is going to help sustain you over the winter time.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the soil real quick. So we want 60 degrees for uniform germination. We talked about that early in the show.
And 65 degrees is even better.
It is better, but at least 60.
And test your soil temperature in the coldest area of your field and use that as your guide for this, because if your soil's warmer, yay! If it's colder, that's not going to be a good day for you.
So pH 6 to 6.5. You want your phosphorus to be about 15 to 30 parts per million, just like field corn. I mean, it's essentially field corn. It's just sweeter.
Yeah.
I mean, the plant, the nutrient requirements are the same as field corn, and your potassium levels, you want it to be right there at 100 to 200 parts per million, which is really anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And your nitrogen requirements are going to be similar. The only difference between sweet corn and field corn is that conversion from free sugars that are sweet and delicious to starch that is hard and, I'm going to say, nutritious, but not delicious.
Right. Before we move on from the varieties, I just wanted to throw out a couple recommended sweet corn varieties for the Ohio Valley area or West Virginia. We've got your bicolor. So let's say you just want the white and yellow mix. Montauk, Providence, or Serendipity are recommended varieties for your bicolor. Your yellow super sweets recommended varieties include Flagship 2, Saturn, and Zenith. Those are good performers in our soils. Yellow, your sugar enhanced version would be the Incredible, Bodacious, Candy Corn, and Tuxedo. Your bicolor sugar enhanced could be a Delectable. And if you are a white corn fan, there's a sugar enhanced variety called Sweet Ice, but also Seneca Sensation. And Avalon is another good one for your white sugar enhanced.
Yeah, and then when we talk about planting, again, 1 to 1.5 inches, and that's kind of a clay soil recommendation. If you got sand soils, go ahead. You can go up to 2 inches. Your rows should be 2 to 3 feet apart, and your plants need to be about 10 inches apart in the rows. And because it's wind pollinated, you have to have some kind of block pattern with no less than 4 rows. So you basically need to concentrate that pollen all around all the plants so that you're not getting. So if you do 2 rows going all the way down for a half a mile, your pollination is not going to work because it's wind pollinated and it's just going to carry the pollen away from your plants. So you got to have that block pattern with no less than 4 rows. The more rows, the better.
And if you're looking at potentially getting your corn out a little earlier, you can put it down with polyplastic, get the biodegradable cornstarch-based stuff. Runs about $500 an acre, but you're not going to use drip tape or irrigation. You're planting on a 6-inch centered double row, about $25,000 per acre, or 2 plant per linear foot row every 7 inches. So that is going to give you a good planting that is going to give you a higher production, especially if you're planting earlier in the season. That black plastic on the soil is going to increase your soil temperature, and it will help to maintain moisture. I want to just make sure that I clarify on the black plastic mulch. You're looking for the stuff that is going to completely biodegrade within about 60 to 65 days, because otherwise it will act as a moisture barrier, and then you will need irrigation through the summer. So you just want it to block the weed production and maintain your soil moisture and heat for the first 2 months, basically. And then it should be gone, and you can then get that production. A jump start is what you're trying to do with that system.
Yeah, and again, you can only plant the same variety types together. So
Right.
if you're doing standard, just stick to standard. If you're doing super sweet, stick to super sweet. And if you're doing the sugar enhanced, stick with sugar enhanced. Now, those fields need to be, what's recommended is 250 feet from any other corn field or any different type of variety. Complete isolation is going to be 700 feet, but 250 to 300 feet is good. It's a really good distance and you're going to have good results.
Right.
So using days apart of tasseling for isolation, 14 days is what you're looking for. And once, let's talk about pests,
Okay.
because you're going to get some pests.
Oh, yeah.
The number one pest is going to be deer, followed by raccoons, and then you're going to have your insect pests. See, the insects aren't going to do as much damage as those big mammals.
Oh, and don't forget about bears, depending on where you are. Many a field's been lost to a bear.
Oh, yeah, and don't be walking around in a really mature field and bump into a bear. That would be a bad news. But you're gonna, typically the insects we talk about with corn, and then sweet corn is going to be right there as well. Is the corn borer, the earworm, and the flea beetle, and you can control those with over-the-counter insecticides such as you can use BT, and BT is one of those things that has an organic label on certain types of BT. That will control the corn borer, but BT won't control the flea beetle. For the flea beetle, the recommendation is carbaryl, which is a synthetic insecticide.
And let's talk about the damage to the seed itself. Seed corn maggots are an issue, especially if you have high organic matter in your field, which is, something we're all working towards, is increasing our organic matter. But if you have a really high organic matter content, you could have some issues with seed corn maggots. And so you do want to make sure in those situations that you are using insecticide treated seed and you're not overwatering. That will help to protect the seed before it even sprouts. And then when you're looking at your management system for corn earworm, you can reduce the load by planting early. And for corn borer, you want to make sure you destroy all of the corn stalks in the fall so that you can kill overwintering larvae that are in those stalks. So good field cleanup in the fall is important if you have a corn borer problem, and plant early to avoid corn earworm. But you will probably still need to treat for corn earworm. You would want to begin spraying at silk emergence silking to harvest about 21 days prior to when the silk is green. That is the best time to treat for corn earworm.
Yeah, and that stuff isn't going to make you sick, but it's hard to sell corn that's damaged. That corn earworm gets in the corn, and then it just, let's say it eats about 1-2% of the corn, and then you bite into it, and then it's just gross. But if it's just for you, if you just want to consume it for yourself and your family, or you want to boil it, it's not going to make you sick.
Yeah, you can cut the end of the tip of the ear off.
It just doesn't make for good sell,
Yeah, you might sell it one year, but you're not going to sell it again the next year. Talk to your customers too. If your customers want a fully natural product, well, it comes with extra protein. Make sure that they understand that.
Well, yeah. I mean, be careful what you wish for, right? But like one thing that you did say, Karen, was the treated seed, and treated seed will help with anthracnose, which then could just decrease overall yield of your crop. Another thing that can happen is corn smut. So you'll get I don't know, it's like a big.
It's a fungus.
Like callus of growth that will ruin that ear. Now that that one's kind of nasty. Best way to get around that is to use varieties that are not susceptible if it's a problem in that area. Silver Queen is one of those. Silver Queen's one of the susceptible ones, and I know Silver Queen's really popular as a standard sweet corn, but if you're getting smut, maybe you should change to something that's more resistant.
Yeah, Silver Queen isn't one that we typically recommend anymore. It was an old favorite, but there are much stronger varieties out there, more disease resistant, more sweetness, and better storage ability than Silver Queen. Silver Queen is one of those ones where you're going to have the pod out in the field with you. But tolerant varieties for corn smut would include Top Notch, Temptation, Sweet Rhythm, Sweet Symphony, and Zenith. And so Zenith was one of those super sweets that we recommended for our area. So that would probably, for this region, I would go with the Zenith. But also, keep in mind that there are markets for smut. It is a delicacy, especially in Mexico. Is a sought after thing. People will grow and populate fields with smut because it does have a delightful flavor for those that enjoy it. I've never tried it, so I can't say.
But probably not in the Ohio Valley.
Probably not in the Ohio Valley. Yeah, you got something there.
I mean, if you want to try to pioneer a market, go for it. But it's probably not as desirable around here. But let's talk harvesting now.
Well, wait, before we get there, I want to talk about some other diseases that you want to watch out for. Rust is a big one. But again, just like any other crop, you try not to water the leaves, but avoid crowding the plants. Space them so that you have good air circulation, and that's going to reduce issues with rust if you've had problems with it in the past.
So 10 inches.
Yeah, potentially. You can also plant resistant varieties. The Top Notch, Temptation, Sweet Rhythm, Wizard, Sweet Symphony, Silverado, Sweet Sioux, Silver Queen are very susceptible. So again, those older varieties, more disease problems, less shelf stability of that sugar. You may want to try a new variety this year. Even if you have your old favorite, try something new, try something different.
All right, now let's talk harvest. So harvesting sweet corn, again, it's very essential that you pick sweet corn when it's at its prime because it will polymerize and then you're going to start biting into field corn. Nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that.
So you want it at the milk stage, which is about 3 weeks from silking. So when it starts silking,
mark your calendar.
Mark your calendar. About 3 weeks is when you want to eat it. The appearance of silks are going to be there. They're going to start falling off, and it's the milk stage where the kernels are nice and plump and juicy.
Right. And you also want to think about, you don't want all of your corn to come ripe at one time. So if you're planning to sell sweet corn throughout the summer, you have to have enough acreage to do this because you have to, like we said, have enough for that cross-pollination to happen. The interior pollination to happen. Yeah, we don't want cross-pollination in corn.
But remember, you can do that temporal isolation. So if it's 2 week stagger, we'll do it.
Right. So Wait 2 weeks, plant another field. Wait 2 weeks, plant another field. That way you can extend your crop, and you can go as late as July 10th for our region to plant sweet corn. Now, when you're planting late, you're going to have higher pest pressure because those insects and wildlife are going to be much more active at that time. But demand is still super high at the market, so you can still get a good price. So go for it.
And you can eat fresh, can, or freeze, and the recommendation is within 12 hours, not 24. 12. You got 12 hours
for processing. Yeah.
So if you can freeze them, it still makes a good product when frozen within that 12-hour time frame.
That's right.
Of course, it's not fresh, and fresh is best.
So I don't know if we have time for this, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. If you are really freaked out about the cost of fertilizer this year, and you're like, well, I don't know if my sweet corn is going to give me a high enough return for all of the nitrogen that I need to buy, I want you to think about your harvest system. And if you have a harvest system that would allow you to space your corn rows out a little bit further, you'll have less corn. But if you can interplant with a legume crop, so beans or peas or, even soybeans, making sure that you have some legumes in there, that can help provide some of the nitrogen that corn needs, thus reducing that nitrogen input cost. It can also help reduce erosion between the rows and help to improve the overall health by managing your moisture content. There's a lot of potential benefits associated with intercropping. There hasn't been a lot of research done. I just skimmed through a recent master's thesis, I think it was, from Illinois State on intercropping corn and soybeans by Raylyn Huffman. So that just came out in 2021. So we're still looking into how these systems work. But if you are interested in trying intercropping, we really want to hear from you and let us know how it goes, what you did, what your spacing was, and give us some feedback on how it worked for you. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.